Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Prince here, Editor-in-Chief of Merion West. I'm joined today by Dr. Tabia Lee, who was up until somewhat recently at Anza College in Cupertino, California. And obviously, Dr. Lee, a lot of people in the past few weeks have seen your appearances on Tucker Carlson, I believe with Megyn Kelly and in the New York Post. And it seems like everybody sort of covered the events of what happened. But for those who aren't familiar, can you just kind of give a brief summary of what got this sort of national discussion going on?
Yes. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I just would like to share that this is an adventure that started for me over 2 years ago. In August 2021, I applied for and made it through a rigorous hiring process for a position at Anza Community College, located in Cupertino, California. This position was for a faculty director for an Office of Equity, Social Justice, and Multicultural Education. And as someone who, has been teaching my whole life, teaching is my vocation. It's something that I've been involved in for my whole life, literally, like from the time I was an elementary school student till now, after formalized education. This was an opportunity to, as the job description said, to lead an institution-wide transformation from the positionality of a faculty member around the topics of equity, social justice, and multicultural education. So in a way, it was putting to use all the skills that I had developed over the years and the expertise that I had developed over the years around those topics. When I interviewed, it was a long process. I went through multiple panels. I did teaching demonstrations. It was very rigorous. And throughout the time, Eric, I was very transparent about who I am and what my values are as an educator. And I made it through the process and I was hired on. But however, when I started to do the work that I had promised I would do and the approach that I promised I would use, that's when I ran into some great difficulties at Anza College. The people who were overseeing my tenure review process. So that's a process when you're becoming a professor, you're going through these multiple years of people evaluating you and seeing, are you a good teacher and how you flow with the institution. And as I started to go through that, there was an immediate ideological bias that was present, not just in the tenure review process, but in my general working conditions. When I started off with my team, a very small team, I was in the first few weeks accused of, they said I was white speaking and white splaining. And then they said I was supporting white supremacy. And I, in this work for many years, had never heard those terms or had those terms used about me or about anyone that I had ever known. And so I didn't quite understand where that was coming from or what it even meant. I started to go to presentations from the individuals who use those terms, and they kept putting up these slides that were always the same. They look like little poison bottles, and they would have things, it would say white supremacy characteristics and being on time, being objective, a worship of the written word. I mean, just all of these characteristics that I, growing up somewhere where there were actual white supremacists, had never heard associated with, the KKK or neo-Nazis, which is what I've always thought of when I heard the term white supremacy. So it was pretty instant from within, again, the first few weeks, and it bled over into my tenure review process. And there was objections to the way I was teaching and engaging people. And I was just told all sorts of things that I never anticipated being told as a faculty member. And, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm trying to concisely tell you all about it.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you were very transparent about what your values are throughout the process. Can you just talk a little bit about what those values are and kind of how you communicated them and maybe the response at the time from some of these same people who presumably were later complicit in your sort of persecution, for lack of a better term?
Yes. So during the process, the panel, I had like administrators, faculty, and staff on the panels, And some of the panelists mentioned that the office that I would be potentially working with, they described it as a little too woke. And whenever I hear terms like that, they're so broad, I always ask, like, what do you mean by that? And so I asked the panelists who said that. Yes, yes. So I said, what are you meaning by that? And they said, well, what they mean is that the people in the office, they do a lot of calling out of faculty members. They make them feel uncomfortable, so they don't want to engage with the office as a resource. They call them racist sometimes. There's a lot of accusations, judgment. And I said, well, by that definition, I definitely don't identify as woke. And I explained what my approach is, which is to invite diverse people into a space, to create spaces where we can exchange ideas and learn from one another, where even sometimes where there's very different perspectives, we can come together and identify points of commonality to best serve our students. In fact, after they identified that pain point to me, because I saw it as a pain point, like that they were saying that this is what's kind of holding up the progress around these topics at the school. I did my teaching demonstration on calling in over calling out. And basically what that was is just basically ways to bring people into dialogue instead of debating and discussing. I have a lot of background and experience in facilitating meaningful dialogues and sacred dialogue. And so I did that demonstration, and it was well received. Even as I went on up to the president, that was my final interview, was with the president of the Anza College. I was really nervous on that one.
Yeah, it seems like a very rigorous application process. We know the academic job market is notoriously tough, so it sounds like you really kind of put through the ringer here.
Yes, yes, and they learned a lot about me, and then when the president mentioned in the interview process, that he was going to have to make a decision, there was another finalist, I was advised, and he would do what was best for the institution. I had that tinge of self-doubt. I'm like, oh, I've probably been too transparent, I said, probably not going to get this. But it was like about 48 hours later, I got the call and I was like, yes, because for me, I had worked for many years as an adjunct. What that means is I was a part-time professor. So you're doing all the work of a full-time person, basically, but you don't have the benefits and you don't have the protection of tenure and, all of that. And I had done that for over a decade. So to land a position that was full-time tenure track, that was monumental. So sometimes people ask me, like, why were you saying that was your dream? That was my dream. That's why I got my doctorate, to become a professor.
And I can only imagine how frustrating this whole process would be, to be an adjunct and then finally be on the path towards, as you said, fulfilling your lifelong dream, so to speak. And now, because of the climate at a lot of institutions, this college being, I guess, just one among many, perhaps, this is sort of snatched from your hands.
Yes, yes, and viciously. I didn't anticipate. So when I started, I actually did needs assessment conversations because I take an inquiry-based approach to everything I do. Like, I never just assume that I know what something needs or, I have the answer. Like, I'm always wanting to hear from the people in the organization or in the context, what do they need? What do they see as the needs? Because often that's not shown on fancy websites, or institutional documents. I've looked at all those things, but I really wanted to hear from people. So Erich, actually did over 60 hours of needs assessment conversations with faculty, with administrators, with staff members. And they kept mentioning, a concern about, we really don't have a lot of different viewpoints here. And I noted that to myself, and I heard it more than once.
Or throughout the college at large?
Throughout the college. Yes, yes. They were talking about the college.
Very ideologically homogenous there at this point.
That's what was stated to me more than once, and I noted that, but they wouldn't tell me what it was, what the issue was. It's just like, we don't have a lot of viewpoints. That's how it was. It was very generalized, and I kept noting it because I'm noting my themes as I'm doing that needs assessment, and trying to think of patterns that I'm hearing. I heard a lot about wokeness. And people using that term again and again. And I would ask them, what do you mean? It would come back to the same ideas. people saying that I'm racist as a teacher. I've gone to workshops with your office and, I felt just really uncomfortable. I was told I was a bad teacher. The things I was doing was wrong. I'm alienating my students, using wrong materials. And so like those kind of themes kept coming up. And I was just like, I'm a teacher advocate. That's why I didn't apply for an administrator position or anything like that. Like I'm a dyed-in-the-wool teacher on the ground, teacher leader is what I call myself.
So when you say that you're not woke, right? I guess a lot of there's sort of an association that sort of the entire effort of diversity, equity, and inclusion is sort of inextricably tied to that movement. But maybe in your view, that's not the case.
No, because my perspective, the way it has been defined to me, I never worked from that way of engaging people. Like I don't think that judging people or accusing them or making people feel bad is a way to transform anyone. I think that gets you like shut out. It shuts down spaces for dialogue and opportunities to learn from one another. When you come in kind of with a hammer and try to hammer people into changing, like I've never worked from that perspective. So in a way, I guess I was unique. Now looking back, it's easy to say that, but initially I was just thinking, what I was doing and what my approach was what all teachers did. I really believed that. But I came to discover very quickly through my engagement there and in the California community college system. So this isn't a De Anza unique problem. It's a system problem with the California community colleges. I just realized that I was very different. The way I was approaching things was very different, and not just me realizing it, it was told to me, through statements like what you're doing is dangerous. One of my values.
Just to clarify, just this process you mean of having discussion and dialogue and saying, let's bring in some critics of this group's objectives and let's sort of adjudicate the different viewpoints and find the best way forward. And that was this sort of pluralistic marketplace of ideas is being maligned as dangerous.
Yes. In one of my, what was that?
That's pretty chilling, right? That we can't even have a debate or discussion about some of these ends.
Yes. In my first workshops, Erich, when I was evaluated, phase one, this is early. This is when the problem started. I had identified that there were different viewpoints on campus, and they were kind of polar opposites. One was aligned with, I don't know if you're familiar with the Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Yes.
Years of essays at MW on.
Yeah, so there was one that was more aligned that way. And then I had like gone out and researched and, trying to find alternatives to name like what some of the other people were working under, because no one would ever tell me. And I was like, well, that's kind of what I'm doing too. So I found it's a Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and they had this they call it the pro-human tenets.
Yes, come in.
Yes, and all I did was I put up both perspectives, and I said, hey, on our campus we have people working from both. I said, there's one's not right, one's not wrong, we're all here. That's how I presented it. So I didn't like editorialize about Kendies. I didn't editorialize about FAIRs. That's the little acronym that group is called. I just presented their tenets on different topics with the citations so people could go look for themselves and see. I wasn't like, just picking things or choosing, I was just trying to be very even. I got people together. They talked about the differences. That was very easy for them. They did it like really quick. And then I said, now what are some points of commonality? And that people struggled with a little bit. And they were like, wow, okay. I said, what are some things that we could identify that are common to both of these seemingly divergent perspectives? Because different people are working in both, here on campus, and that's okay. And that's how I framed it. And we identified some commonalities. The evaluator told me I was very disrespectful. What I did was dangerous. I should never, and this is in writing, I should never broach controversial topics in any essay or workshop that I do. That I was wrong for doing so, and that I offended her deeply because she identifies as a third wave anti-racist, and that I should never do that type of thing again, where I compare that ideology to another. it's simply not allowed.
Well, I think it's so interesting because sort of part and parcel of the Kendi approach seems to be sort of eschewing debate. And we know, for instance, Coleman Hughes has, it's sort of a running joke on Twitter how many times he's invited Kendi to a debate, and sort of other people in that sort of group, whether it's Glenn Lowry and others, have kind of mentioned again and again how sort of curious it is that Kendi doesn't want to sort of have his views examined in debates with other people at all. So I think that that is a very sort of very consistent with this entire situation that we're facing both in universities as a country, this idea that we're not going to even try to question some of the premises by which certain thinkers operate under.
Yes, and that we cannot even talk about it like dialogue. No one made any judgments. I didn't say like, well, this one's good and this one's bad or that one's bad. It was nothing like that. It was a full acceptance of everyone in the space, and a respectfulness. So to be told that I was, crossing some kind of line, should never speak of controversy. I didn't know it was a controversial topic. I just thought it was different ways of viewing these things, and that I should avoid those. And I'm like, okay, I came into the field because I value academic freedom and freedom of expression. And I like those are values for me. Like I was like, I will be a professor. I will be able to guide people through meaningful inquiry. This is an institution-wide role. So I was doing everything I promised to do. And to be told that I was offensive, deeply offensive, and to have that in my evaluation, and then to have the checkbox for accepts criticism checked because of that, like without any kind of grounding or rooting or pointing to anything, the idea was it was an objection to just the concept that I would even dare to compare these ideas. And then in the conversations, the tone of it was so dismissive. This person wouldn't even talk to me at a post-observation discussion. You're supposed to have a talk before the write-up happens. Well, this person came with the write-up done before the meeting. And then as we started to talk, and I started to look at their ratings, they said, just take a look at the document. They sent it to me through Zoom. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, well, why did you mark accepts criticism, that I need improvement? I said, we've never even talked, and this is our first time talking. This person refused to even engage me as a fellow scholar and colleague in a discussion. They ended the meeting within 10 minutes. They said, there's nothing for us to talk about. My evaluation's written, it's final, and I'm filing it. And that's how the tone and tenor went. So there wasn't even this, I was treated like an apprentice. Like I wasn't even an equal scholar or colleague. There's this lack of civility. There's this dismissal, like you should not exist because you've offended me. You should be erased and completely demolished, from the whole academic enterprise. And that was the beginning. This is in October of 2021, and it continued onward for 2 years the same way. Even after the committee was reconstituted, they just substituted different folks in. Same thing happened again this year.
Well, good for you for not capitulating, Dr. Lee, right? Because there must have been an occasion or two where one must have been tempted to say, I'm just going to go with the Kendi, Robin DiAngelo school of thought and just sort of put that forward as the capital T truth, end all and be all. But it seems as perhaps throughout you were still trying to remain committed to this idea of exchange of ideas.
Yes. If anything, I saw how toxic the implementation of this certain ideology was, and the damage that it could do, not just for the people who are pushing it, but for other people, people like me who just want to get people to think critically, who aren't subscribing to any of these different ideas and perspectives. We just want to create environments where people have access to hearing different points of view, and letting adult learners decide what resonates for them, not me telling you or, you becoming a mini me in my class. Like I've never operated that way. I don't feel like that's a role of a teacher. I think teachers should teach how to think, not what people should be thinking. And I've just held to that my whole life. And through doing that and being my most authentic self, I was subjected to just nonstop harassment and bullying on a daily basis. I never wanted to give up. because I felt like this is the future of like California at stake. I'm very California localized, and then I
Right.
realized it's more than just California. It's national. Since I've become more public, more people have contacted me. So yeah, that's just kind of my commitment there.
So, sort of related to a question that I alluded to earlier, and maybe your views on this have changed over time. Do you think it's possible in institutions, whether corporations, universities, is it possible to have sort of these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we talk a lot about, and keep it a dialogue, or do you think it inevitably sort of bleeds the line into becoming not tolerating dissent and becoming, as you said, sort of bullying of people who maybe say, I don't agree with this worldview, or I don't agree with some of the points that are typically presented in these types of organizations, these types of bodies?
This is something, Eric, that I've just been surprised at how quickly some people call it DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, has steamrolled through the field of education, and not just there, but like civic life, corporate life, everywhere. I've never seen a change take place this rapidly. And so many offices pop up. And I think there's not a lot of critical thought around it. There's been a lot of reactionary movement from organizations, from people, from individuals, from colleges and universities, developing statements, putting offices in, putting people, faculty members, singular faculty members as leaders to transform a place, which I don't think should happen anywhere ever again. I think that's a wrong, like in terms of power structures, a single teacher should not be leading that effort. If anything, it should be a president or cabinet level position thing. But because when you're subject to the tenure review process, it's very shaky. Like I even had people who told me, Lee, you need to just be quiet and make it through tenure. Don't rock any boats. But how do you transform without that? So I think that, when we're talking about transforming organizations and things of that nature, part of my work right now, Eric, I'm getting to the point because you're kind of like, that's not the question, but like, I'm getting to that point.
Hearing about your experience and your thought process, please, by all means.
Yes, but getting to the point that you asked me,
Yeah.
it's important that because it's easy to say like these offices shouldn't exist and they should just be gone. Unfortunately, this is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. They exist, and it's hard to, like, if we could all say it should be gone, it's terrible, but it's there. So then how do we deal with this issue now? It, to me, is more of a better framing of the problem, and some possible solutions. And for me, what I've been doing through my work, and which got me really bounced out, was telling people there's more than one way to do this DEI stuff. Depending on the ideology or the framework you're working in, you can have different outcomes. So right now in the industry and at most colleges and universities, there's a default. They're not being transparent. They're not identifying themselves. But what I've been doing through my research, I've identified it as critical social justice approach, our neo-reconstructionism around race specifically. There are other perspectives and ways and tools that can be used, namely the skeptical eliminativist approach, which is under the work of Dr. Sheena Mason and Dr. Carlos Hoyt and others in that field. There's tools and pedagogies that can be used that are not the same tools of having students view themselves as victims and oppressors and all of these things that come along with adopting what is the de facto DEI approach in so many sectors right now. And I would love to see CEOs, superintendents, college presidents, all of these people who make these decisions to bring these programs in, to start becoming more aware that there are multiple ways to do it, and then to start naming what their institution is doing so that students can make a choice, parents can make a choice, everyone can make a choice and say, oh yeah, I want to go somewhere where they're doing that critical social justice stuff. Like that aligns with me and my family's mission. And that's what I want my child to learn, or that's what I want to learn as an adult. Like that should be more transparent. They should start naming it. And I think when people start to name it and look at it side by side, that was part of what got me into trouble at De Anza. I was having people look at these ideas side by side. and I was told I was dangerous. I was leading people to danger. I'm leading people to destruction by comparing and showing different ways, because there's only one way, according to some people who are really, this is an orthodoxy that they're attempting to advance.
Yeah, I think the transparency point is sort of important. I've actually, and I'll betray my bias and say I'm grateful, but I've actually not had to attend any of these sessions ever. So I don't know exactly what goes on, but someone like me looks at it and is a little suspicious because it seems like the term is sort of amorphous and it has kind of these anodyne or even positive names of diversity and inclusion. They sound like good things, but like little alarm bell goes off because I feel like they're maybe left intentionally vague or euphemistic, and just sort of maybe being a little bit of a natural skeptic, and long before we even started at MW covering this at length, it's just a little suspicious. It says, why don't you state kind of clearly what type of things are being put forward? And I guess some critics would say they don't state them clearly because your median person would probably object to some of the things that are commonly being articulated in these meetings.
Yes, Eric, I would strongly agree with that. What I've seen and experienced by being in this particular space that I was in and that I remain in until June 30th, is there is an inversion and a subversion of terms that are common. Like you say diversity, like, yes, I support diversity. Inclusion, yeah, I want everyone to feel included.
Yeah,
Like,
we're nice people. We want people to be happy. Sure.
yeah, yes. So, but what is meant by those through a critical social justice lens is completely different than what I grew up, experiencing in my schooling. I come from a background that I've identified as more of a classical social justice perspective. And, it's a different emphasis on what is knowledge, what do you focus on, and what is your end game? Like, what do you want for society at large? It's very starkly different. I would even say diametrically opposed to the critical social justice viewpoint in the way that these people are working and what they're doing in institutions.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that sort of, I guess when you took a position like this, you must have had some sort of goals that you want to implement or what society should look like. And that's probably consistent. As you said, education was your vocation. A lot of people I think who get into education have certain things that they would like to see more of in society. So maybe you could talk about what you would like to see more of, and this idea that insofar as it is diametrically opposed, what the critical social justice perspective would like society to look like.
Yes, yes. That's something that I think is really important. So I would love to just kind of unpack that, because they're the like, kind of jargony terms. It's like, what does that mean? So in terms of like, what do we focus on? Under a critical social justice perspective, what is focused on in that perspective is oppression and what I call tribalistic identity. That is the focus of all things. All things are viewed through that lens, and that takes like priority over everything, even beyond academic disciplines. From a classical social justice perspective, the things that are focused on are things like freedom, thinking of individuality, the individual story, the individual experience. So not your tribalistic identity, but who you are as an individual person, and the different struggles and triumphs and so forth that have taken place. In terms of knowledge and how do we understand knowledge, under critical social justice, there's this prioritizing of what's called lived experience, and knowledge is considered to be relative. And that's very different from a classical social justice perspective, which would say that knowledge is objective and that it is tied to things like free will and human agency. Those things are de-emphasized. They're actually just completely disregarded in a critical social justice perspective, because there is no free agency or free will. You have an identity that is determined by a checkbox, and you are grouped with your tribe, and your tribe has representatives that speak for everyone, and your experience needs to align with what's been identified. Is your tribe and your group a victim or are they oppressors? And there's no escaping that in the critical social justice ideology, like way of thinking about the world. So you can see how these are very different, right? Under classical social justice, we see things like movements around civil rights of the 60s and things of that nature. There's a different understanding of what equity is.
Yeah, I
under
wanted
that.
to ask you about that, so I'm glad you.
Yes. Yes, a huge difference, because I was even told, as I started to work at Anza, I said, let's see what we all mean when we're saying equity, because I was told we're all saying these words, we mean different things by it. That's why we can't make any progress. And so as I started to talk with my office team and my supervising dean about it, I discovered that when I would say things like, and this is just my genuine thoughts, I would say, to me, equity and equality are intertwined. Like you can't have one without the other. You need both, to be able to make any kind of progress or transformation. I was told directly, we don't talk about equality. Equality is a thing of the past. That's over. We've gone through that day. We're all about equity. And so then I said, okay, then tell me, what is equity to you? Because to me, equity is fairness. It means equality of opportunity, all of these things that I had been taught and just done as a teacher and learned.
Right.
I was shown pictures. They would never give me a definition. They would show me like images, people standing on boxes, and they would say equity is leveling the playing field. And I would say, well, how does that apply to teaching and learning? Like, how do I help support faculty with that definition? Then I was shown pictures of a tree with apples dropping down. And this was one that really stood out to me. And the person said, equity means everybody gets some of the apples. So I said,
dictionary, we're supposed to be at a university having a discussion, not elementary school. I don't know. It seems really silly to me.
no, and this person was praised. They were told, thank you so much for your accurate definition of equity. And I said, to me, that doesn't make sense. I said, it sounds like what you're talking about. And this is where I started to think of the outcomes of the ideologies. You're talking about equality of outcomes.
Yeah,
Like that's what you're that's what you're saying. And I said, what does that mean to a democratic society? And a society where we value like personal liberty and freedom and democracy, like how is that even a democratic idea? And for that, I was really told that I was in the wrong. I was offensive for even saying such things. And I just said, to me, I've always focused on equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. I don't know if that's even a goal educationally or socially that people would want to live in a world where that exists. And that's what got me deemed a pariah,
that's
yes.
shocking though, in a way. Well, shocking is a strong word because we have the headlines out of academia day in and day out that I guess nothing's too surprising anymore. But what a lot of these things I think were just sort of basic American principles for a pretty long time. And now it seems as though you, a career educator and PhD person, long history with the California educational system, is being sort of ousted for saying things that I would say 7 years ago would just be pretty common, at least in the East Coast or in Pennsylvania where I'm from, would just be kind of basic common sense up until sort of what I broadly call the post 2015 era, starting sort of we could pinpoint differently, but I would say sort of the Yale Halloween controversy, if you recall, there on out. But like, I don't know, it seems pretty basic. Let's have equality of opportunity. If everyone has to end up in the same place, that doesn't seem commensurate with individual liberties, or just sort of viewing society as individual people with different talents and different work ethics. And just chance, you meet someone for business opportunity or you don't, just kind of reality that people end up in different places.
Yes, and I didn't think I was really like you said, this is, to me, just seemed like basics. Like that's how I taught 20 years ago, like that. This is what I've always done as an educator. So I felt like I fell down a rabbit hole, and it just got deeper and deeper and worse the more time went on. Because you would think that after someone like files complaints and does all these things, people would get on their best behavior. That's not what happened here. They actually doubled down on the bullying and the push out efforts, and it just became worse. So and that taught me something too. It was so important. Like the facts didn't matter. The truth of a matter, evidence didn't matter. Like none
I
of those
think
things mattered.
we established that looking for evidence is what is it called? White splaining or something?
Yes, and white speaking apparently. So
Uh,
yeah.
so what do you think is sort of, and I've asked this question to a lot of people I've interviewed in the past couple of years, sort of coming from the academic sphere more broadly, is sort of what is the future for academia? Does one sort of, I don't want to use too pugnacious a word, but does one sort of fight for the current schools and try to get those ideas across and say we're not going to become this way? Does one try to, like Ralston College, try to start your own school? Or perhaps most controversially, does one sort of advocate for states with, say, Republican trifectas, Tennessee, Florida, to say at state funded schools, you can't do X, Y, and Z?
So that's a question that's very context bound. You kind of pointed out with the discussion of the states, each state's so different and the environment there could be different. I really just, I'm hoping that students can get more informed and families and people who influence, just general citizens and constituents can become more aware of what's happening. Because I think if people knew that I taught at a public college, so this isn't a private
Yeah, I
school.
think that's
And
a
this
really crucial point, and I just want to make sure everyone watching understands that. So,
yes,
not a
yes.
public college.
This is not a private college. Even though the people that I encountered acted like gangsters instead of educators, like I was on their turf and they had to, oust me out because I'm not saying the right thing. This is a public college, public universities. They should be there to serve the entire public. And that's not what's happening. And I think if the public knew about that, there would be an outcry because, how are we doing that? My community has diverse people in it. They're not just on one end of the spectrum or the other. I mean, there's all kinds of people in the community. And if you're a community college, you should be serving every single person in that community. And what I found as I started to do, more actual inclusion work, like the things that I worked on around Jewish inclusion and anti-Semitism education, that was strongly resisted. I received no support for it.
Can you just briefly describe a little bit more about what happened when you tried to discuss anti-Semitism? And I think I saw it covered in one of the news stories about sort of your experiences.
Yes. So this came, why I started looking into this topic and doing work around it. So one of my jobs, I was to lead that institution-wide transformation and to promote inclusion. And so to me, inclusion means where every single person feels welcomed, they feel like they belong, they feel safe, they can be their most authentic self without repercussion.
Including people who are politically conservative, for instance.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And from different viewpoints, and different perspectives and different ethno-religious groups and so forth. And so I served on a group that's called the Equity Action Council. And early on, as I did my needs assessment conversations, anti-Semitism was mentioned by faculty members. There were concerns that were brought, and they said, but your office has never done anything about them. Concerns about the academic calendar, starting on high holy holidays, all of these different things for years that I was told that nothing had been done on. And then a person from our Hillel of Silicon Valley came to the Equity Action Council, and they presented concerns about the Jewish students and the environment on the campus and the lack of inclusion. And they provided recommendations to us. And they said, if you all could just, update your website where you say Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian racism is important to address, could you just put a statement in there that says, an anti-Semitism is wrong. It's on the rise. We won't tolerate it here. When we took that back to my team to talk about it, and say, what are we going to, I'm an action person. What are we going to do about it? I was told we're not going to do anything about it. I was told there's multiple organizations who make recommendations to us, CARE being one of them, that's the Council on Islamic Relations, and we've never done anything about it. And I said, well, can I see those recommendations? Like, I genuinely, Eric, I want to see what is the community bringing and us to do something to make everyone feel included. They refused to let me see the recommendations. To this day, I've never seen those recommendations, but I had in my hand recommendations about anti-Semitism and the needed actions. So then I said, okay, let's go ahead and update the website. Let's put that little line. It's just an update to the website saying we stand against it. And they said, no, we're not doing that. Because
you gotta be kidding me.
yes.
I actually can't even believe that.
Yes, they said we're not doing that because that's not decentering whiteness. We're focused on decentering whiteness, and that's off topic from what we're doing.
It's
And
very
I
like a redistributive ideology, decentering
yes,
whiteness.
yes, and that was a constant. I mean, about other topics, this came up again, and this idea of decentering whiteness, and I was like, why are we so focused on that? What in our student data is telling us to do that? You know what? Where is this even coming from? And I realized it was just a toxic ideology that certain people held to. And it is the alienating ideology that's making so many faculty who aren't, part of any extremes feel uncomfortable. And it's dominating, unfortunately. So no, there was no change to the website. Our board of trustees in February of 2022 came out with a statement saying that, they condemn anti-Semitism. That's all it said. It didn't define it. It didn't say any action, which I wish it had, but I used that as my North Star because that's the board of trustees, right, over everything. And I said, hey, even our board of trustees is recognizing it. If my small office isn't going to recognize it, I have what I need to act now. And I knew I needed to act from the discussions that were had internally, right? There was something off and terribly wrong, and we needed community education. So I actually organized a summit, around that topic, and I brought in multiple speakers. I didn't have any financial support. I didn't have any tactical support. I didn't even have promotional support.
Good for you.
So and then, but the rub, Eric. So that whole summit happened for weeks. This was a 5-week thing. It was not promoted on college calendar or events. It was like under the radar. But then shortly after that, the Progressive Student Union held an event, and they had actual things in the title like anti-Israel activist, anti-Zionist, performer, and things of that nature. It was sent out to all of the students. When they would log into their Canvas, they would see it pop up. But our summit was not promoted. So when I say there's deeply entrenched issues, that's what I'm pointing to. Like you couldn't even put it on the calendar so students would know and be able to learn.
The infrastructure is sort of rigged against anyone trying to question any of this. And yes. This decentering whiteness, it seems so reductive because obviously we talk a lot about a lot of these activists, I think, are very interested in sort of past injustices. And it seems to sort of whitewash maybe the suffering of Armenian people during their genocide or Irish people during the potato famine. It just seems so reductive to, based on someone's skin tone, have no interest in any sort of past suffering, especially from groups who are really interested in that sort of concept. So kind of just winding down a little bit, what was sort of, I guess at this point, I would imagine you're sort of persona non grata among your colleagues and such. So did you hear any reactions from your colleagues when, I would guess for a lot of those folks, someone like Tucker Carlson must be like the Grim Reaper in their view or something? Were they surprised that you were on with Tucker and some of these other, I guess, conservative personalities? I know certain people would argue, well, Tucker takes a lot of, anti-war positions. They're often associated with the left. And I know left-right is it's not always the easiest discussion buckets to define, but I would imagine that a lot of your colleagues would be very taken aback that you would go on Fox or something like that.
The things that have happened in the past few weeks, Eric, are beyond my imagination. Right. I never would have imagined me on any newscast at all, left, right, whatever, but the funny, it's not funny, but the thing I'm grateful for, I actually have strong support among my colleagues, the majority of the people, and the students. I started an effort called the Heritage Month Work Group. The whole purpose of it was to recognize, federally established heritage months that the college had never recognized in all its years. They only focus on a few groups of people. And it's so disconcerting to me because I'm like, there's so many other heritage months, and so
We had a
uh-huh.
writer, Solomon Green, at MW a couple months ago, sorry, a couple years ago, do an article about that exact topic. So you're the second person now that I've heard mention that. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yes, yeah, and that's a way, right? Again, part of my job duties, expand inclusion. So I'm like, hey, De Anza's never had a Native American Heritage Month. They've never had an Arab American Heritage Month. They've never had a Jewish American Heritage Month or a Sikh American Awareness and Appreciation Month. All of those things had never happened. Our Heritage Month work group, which is a cross-campus coalition of folks that I, brought together with my co-chair, we took this effort to the De Anza student government, and they said, wow, this is what we need. You're elevating groups who never had a voice here, never had a space. I can learn about other cultures. They voted to support us. It went to the academic senate. The response was completely different. They said, is this part of the Jewish stuff that you're doing? It seems like you're just trying to push that again. Is this multi-faith calendar you trying to turn us into a religious school? And they did not vote to support
What a
us.
cynical worldview, Dr. Lee. That's so, instead of saying like, I want to learn about Jewish culture or any culture, you say you're trying to have some sort of ulterior motive. That's,
yes.
it seems like very, whatever the opposite of open-minded is.
Yes. So the students are hungry. They want to see greater inclusion. They want to learn about other cultures, but it's the adults who are in charge, who put the kibosh on this potential for transformative change.
Sounds like it might only be a minority of the adults because you're saying that most of your colleagues, and this is and I've interviewed a lot of people, well, in particular about how this sort of worldview has taken root in engineering, in medicine, and in STEM, as the new terminology is. And the key point they always make is it's usually only 10% or maybe 20%, and it's never a majority. It's never even 45% usually, but this sort of intolerant minority is able to make these points. And because people are aware of my writings and various positions I've taken, they said, boy, you must have been really discriminated against ideologically at Yale by your faculty and other students. I said, actually, no, not really. Just a very kind of small number. And the most people that I ran across would say, I don't agree with your argument, but thank you for making it. I'm actually really glad that it's out there. So I think there's sort of this misconception that the majority of people are intolerant to hearing other views. And that is not my experience. It doesn't sound like it's your experience, Dr. Lee. And in a way, we just have maybe 10 or 15% of people who are kind of driving the discourse. And as you're pointing out, sometimes not even out in the open, but through using sort of abstruse infrastructure devices to get this done, whether it's a calendar or a listserv or however it works, they seem to kind of know which buttons to push.
Yes, yes, and they really work in the dark. They like to do that, and they wield their influence in key positions like the academic senate, which has really been undermined and done really strange things beyond not supporting the Heritage Month work group. We even had a situation where racialized affinity groups became voting members in the academic senate. And I didn't oppose or support that. I just asked questions about it, like what could be the Title IX implications, what could be the implications of we only have 3 racialized affinity groups. They're not representative of every member of that quote race, and I just asked questions, and I was accused of attacking those groups, and they became voting members. And I said, well, what does this do to the purpose and mission of an academic senate? It used to be, and what I've always understood it was, it represents disciplines in an institution, academic disciplines.
Right.
You have representatives from each discipline, and they come together as a caucus, and they work together. So why are we putting racialized affinity groups and gender ideology infused affinity groups as voting members? Is our institution now focused on those things instead of academic disciplines? And if so, why did no one send the memo out to the community and to the workers there to know? And it seems preposterous, like if you're stepping from the outside and saying that really happened. It really happened. It's well documented too.
And I guess, as you pointed out before, also this thought that if you're a racialized group, you speak for all the people in that race. And I know there's the group, for instance, Free Black Thought, and others that would be really resent someone saying that because I have this skin color, I must believe these 8 or 9 different things. A friend of mine just actually left me a message this morning about how frustrated he is that people think because he is Black, he must have to believe A, B, C, D, and E, and finds it really demoralizing.
Yes, and it is. It's demoralizing and dehumanizing, that viewpoint. I'll share a brief story with you, Eric.
Sure.
In June of
Love
my
your
first,
stories, Dr. Lee. Some of them I can't believe my ears, but
yes,
they're
in
very
June,
leave a lot to think about.
a group of people went to the board of trustees. This was my first year in, and they demanded my immediate termination. They were claiming that they were representing the Anza Latinx or Latinx, I have problems with those terms, group, and the Asian Pacific American Staff Association. 5 people went. They made this most ridiculous and harmful and terrible statements about me as a person. Some of them I'd never even talked to. And they got to speak each 3 minutes. So it went on, 5 people, 3 minutes. And them saying that I did and said things that I had never done and said, and accusations that weren't rooted in anything I'd ever actually done. It later, when that was aired, because these are public meetings, public comment, some members of those groups contacted me and they said, Lee, everyone calls me Lee. They're like, Lee, what the heck is going on? They said, I saw people there from the, APASA, and which I'm a member of, and they were saying you should be terminated. And like, I've been working with you and we're collaborating. Like, what are they talking about? And they said they didn't poll us. They didn't ask for consensus. There was no vote. Like, I'm a member and they said they represented me. So it was actually discovered this individuals were claiming to represent the whole. And this is what happens when you have these toxic racialized affinity groups on any campus. They're just wrong. It shouldn't happen. No one person or even group of people can claim to represent a viewpoint of any group of people. Like, that's what is that? And I know for a fact, and that's why I questioned it, there are some people who don't affiliate with those groups. So they're not representative. You can't claim representation. So they shouldn't exist in the first place. They're divisive. They're segregationists. Like, we're moving backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like upside down world, because I was under the impression that the goal of a lot of these sort of reform movements was to try to see people increasingly as individuals rather than as part of a group. So I think I'm in, the Twilight Zone or something, that now this is the new norm. So I have a hard time keeping on top of all the new sorts of things. So last question, Dr. Lee, and maybe you don't have a clear answer right now, but sort of what's next? You were an educator for all these years. I'm sure there are a lot of schools and such that would be happy to have you. I certainly hope to God that that would be true. You're becoming a sort of media person, going on a lot of people's shows and things like that. So kind of what do you think is next, and kind of where's your head at after obviously what's been a pretty difficult couple of years?
Eric, I'm even more committed to doing my life's work, which is teaching and helping to support teachers. I think teachers need support now more than ever. Unfortunately, a lot of the teacher education programs have been overtaken by some toxic ideologies. And so teachers are going to learn how to be effective teachers, and they're getting indoctrinated into ideological perspectives, a singular one. I think that those things need to be opened up, and people need to know there's many ways to do work. You don't have to just do it one way. And these programs should stop pushing a biased way of viewing the world onto teachers and then telling them that's what you do in your classroom to help your students succeed. It's not working. And so I'm even more committed to teacher education, to opening up those teacher education programs, to creating alternative programs to the de facto the status quo that's kind of out there right now, and raising awareness about these different topics. There's definitely race ideologies that are at play, gender ideologies that are at play. We need to be aware of that. We need to talk about it.
They don't know. And they don't know that Dr. Kendi says that the answer to past discrimination is present or future discrimination. They don't know that. They say, oh, and a lot of these people I think are well-meaning, and they are upset that certain things had happened in the past, but they don't know, I think, some of the details. So
And there's ways to teach about the past, right? That are humanistic, that are agency focused, and that are focused on generative things rather than destructive things, rather than dismantling things and tearing things down with no plan forward of what happens after the destruction. There are other ways to do it. There are other methods. There are other frameworks to use. And they're starting to get more traction because people like me and others are talking about it. I think the more we talk about it and start to expose and name, I think that's going to be helpful to people, because then they can say and choose, like, yes, I want to go to a place that does that kind of work or this kind of work. And I have a choice in doing that. I don't think it's too far gone. I've been asked, Eric, like, shouldn't this just all be destroyed? Like, your position never should have existed. Like, I've heard those perspectives, and there's truth in there too. I think that's
You're
important.
still optimistic that
Yes,
right.
you have to be. You have to be, because I believe in America. I believe in the American experiment. I believe that it's not perfect, and nothing is. But that's the beauty of it, and that's why we have this opportunity to live where we live, and to express our viewpoints freely. And I never want to lose that. And some people are really pushing for us to only say the approved ideas, and that's concerning no matter where it's coming from to me. I always want to live in a place where democracy is centered, and our republic is respected, and those are values that I think are important, and I will never let those go, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that my colleagues and my friends and fellow teachers continue to hold those essential, not these new ideologies that have popped up in the past few years here.
Dr. Lee, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me. You're very nice, and I really wish you well with everything going forward. So thanks for kind of telling your story and sharing how you see the world. So thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.